into her house, I thought I was just renting a room. I didn't know I'd find someone who could make silence feel like electricity, and rules feel like something worth breaking. When I first moved into that old suburban house, I told myself it was only temporary, a few months of quiet before I figured out what came next. The place looked like it had seen a few decades of laughter and heartbreak, but it stood proudly, white shutters, a wraparound porch, and windows that caught the afternoon sun in warm, forgiving tones. And then there was her, Clara. She opened the door with a smile that felt both welcoming and careful, like she had practiced the art of kindness without ever letting it become invitation. She looked to be in her early 40s, graceful posture, soft hair pinned back loosely, and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize hesitation when she saw it. "Welcome," she said. "You must be Daniel." Her voice was low, warm, the kind that made you listen, not because she demanded attention, but because it carried calm. She walked me through the house, explaining the rules with quiet authority. No guests after 9. No loud music. Rent on the 1st of every month. I nodded along, pretending to pay attention, but I was too aware of the way sunlight caught the curve of her cheek, or how she pushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she talked. Every movement was precise yet effortless, the kind of grace you don't notice until you realize you've stopped breathing. The rooms smelled faintly of fresh paint and lavender polish. Wooden floors creaked softly under our steps. I followed her down the narrow hallway, the sound of her heels tapping rhythmically like a heartbeat I was trying not to count. When she handed me the keys, our fingers brushed, just for a second. The contact was so brief that it might not have even happened, but my chest tightened all the same. She didn't react. Maybe she didn't notice. But the warmth of that moment stayed with me long after she turned away. "This will be your space," she said, opening the door to a modest upstairs room. "You'll have privacy. I work early mornings, so I tend to keep to myself." There was something in the way she said privacy, a boundary wrapped in courtesy. I thanked her and set my bag down, pretending to admire the view from the small window. From here, I could see her tending to the garden, kneeling beside the rose bushes, sleeves rolled up, sunlight touching the edge of her hair. She looked peaceful there, as if the garden was the only place she allowed herself to slow down. As evening fell, I heard her humming faintly downstairs, a soft tune, something old. The house was quiet otherwise, and that quietness felt heavier than silence, it felt like presence. Lying in bed later that night, I realized I hadn't thought much about the new job or the rent or the city. I was thinking about her voice, the calm steadiness of it, and the way she said, "Welcome." It wasn't attraction yet. Not even longing. Just a strange, quiet pull, the feeling that for reasons I couldn't name, this house and the woman who owned it were about to change something in me I didn't know needed changing. The first week passed quietly. I settled into the rhythm of the house, its creaks, its stillness, and the subtle ways it seemed to echo her presence. Every morning, I'd wake to the faint clatter of dishes downstairs, the low hum of a kettle, and a sound that became strangely comforting, her soft humming, drifting through the air vents like a private melody the house had memorized long before I arrived. Clara's mornings were predictable in the gentlest way. She'd water the potted plants on the porch, feed the stray cat that occasionally appeared, and then sit by the kitchen window with her cup of tea, reading something small and worn. I learned this not because I tried to, but because I couldn't help noticing. One morning, I was up early, restless from a night of half-sleep. I went downstairs to grab coffee, thinking she'd still be asleep. But she was there, barefoot, wrapped in a pale robe, her hair loosely tied and a few strands falling freely around her face. "Oh," she said, surprised but not startled. "You're up early." I smiled awkwardly, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was, how even the sound of water pouring into a cup seemed too loud. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She gestured to the other chair at the table. "Then join me. I made too much coffee anyway." I sat across from her, unsure whether I should speak or let the moment breathe. The air between us felt fragile, as though any wrong word might break it. Steam curled lazily from our cups, mingling in the soft light filtering through lace curtains. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, two people sharing the same silence. And somehow, that silence didn't feel empty, it felt full. Eventually, she looked up. "You're quiet," she said. I shrugged lightly. "You seem like someone who prefers quiet." A small smile touched her lips. "I do. But sometimes it's nice when it's shared." The simplicity of that line stayed with me. It wasn't flirtation, it was honesty. The kind that slips out when you forget to guard your heart. She reached for the sugar jar, and as she did, the edge of her robe slipped slightly off one shoulder, not deliberate, just natural. Her skin caught the morning light, and for a moment, I forgot about words entirely. She noticed my glance, not with irritation, but with quiet understanding. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, the kind that didn't accuse or invite, just acknowledged. That tiny exchange, the look, the breath between us, said more than any conversation could. When I finally stood to leave, she said softly, "I usually take my coffee alone. But this morning didn't feel so lonely." Her voice was gentle, almost casual, but I could feel the truth beneath it, the same truth that had begun to hum quietly inside me since the day I moved in. As I climbed the stairs back to my room, I looked down once more. She was still at the table, her fingers resting lightly on her cup, eyes lost in the window's reflection. And though nothing had happened, no touch, no confession, something between us had changed. The air itself seemed to carry it. The kind of change that begins in silence, and refuses to stay there. It started with a storm, not the soft, passing kind, but one that felt alive. The kind that makes windows shudder and lights flicker, that fills the air with the smell of wet earth and the nervous pulse of thunder waiting to fall. By early evening, rain was coming down in relentless sheets. The wind pressed against the windows like a restless guest demanding to be let in. I had been reading, trying to ignore the faint unease storms always brought me, when the lights went out. Complete darkness. Then, a knock. "Daniel?" Her voice, soft but steady, came from the hallway. I opened the door to find Clara standing there with a flashlight, her hair slightly damp, a loose sweater clinging lightly to her shoulders. The beam of light caught the droplets on her face, glinting like small stars. "Fuse blew again," she said, smiling faintly. "I was checking the box, but I think it's completely gone for the night." Her calmness steadied me. "You shouldn't be walking around in this," I said. "You're soaked." She laughed softly. "It's just rain. I've survived worse." Still, I found myself stepping aside, gesturing toward my room. "You can wait in here till it eases up." For a moment, she hesitated, just long enough for me to see the flicker of thought behind her eyes. Then she nodded. "All right. But only because it's freezing." We sat together in the living room downstairs instead, a few candles flickering between us, their small flames painting her face in gold and shadow. The rain outside drummed against the roof like a heartbeat we both tried not to listen to. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea I'd made, her fingers brushing mine when I handed it to her. The touch was nothing, brief, ordinary, but my skin remembered it long after she let go. For a while, we said nothing. Just sat there, the kind of silence that holds its own conversation. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, "It's strange how silence makes everything louder." I looked at her, at the faint lines near her eyes, the quiet grace of her expression. She didn't look lonely, exactly, but there was a kind of distance there, the kind that comes from missing something you've already accepted you won't get back. "Maybe some silences are meant to be shared," I said quietly. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. A flash of lightning lit up the room, outlining her profile in silver. The candlelight caught in her eyes, turning them soft and searching. She smiled faintly, but didn't speak. When thunder rolled again, she instinctively reached out, her hand resting lightly on my forearm. Just a simple, human gesture. Yet the warmth of it settled something deep inside me. We stayed like that for a long moment, watching the storm dance beyond the window, neither willing to break the stillness. And when the power finally returned, the light felt almost intrusive, too bright, too real. She blinked, lowered her hand, and gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "For the tea. And the company." After she left, the house felt different, quieter, but not empty. Somewhere between the thunder and the silence, the space between us had changed. And I knew, without quite knowing why, that the storm wasn't the only thing that had passed through that night. The morning after the storm, the house felt different, lighter somehow, but also uncertain. Like the air itself remembered what had happened, and neither of us knew quite what to do with that memory. Clara was polite when I saw her that day, perfectly normal, perfectly distant. She asked if my room was all right, if the power had stayed on. Her words were careful, her smile rehearsed. The same woman who'd sat beside me in candlelight the night before now felt a step further away. Over the next few days, that distance grew. Our greetings shortened. Her eyes no longer lingered on mine. And the quiet that had once felt intimate now sat between us like a locked door. I told myself to let it go, that she was just protecting her boundaries, and I should respect them. But every time I heard her voice downstairs, or caught a glimpse of her silhouette in the garden, something inside me pulled toward her again. Finally, one evening, I found her outside, tending to the rose bushes as twilight deepened. The world was bathed in soft gold and blue, that hour when day forgets to end and night hasn't quite begun. "Need any help?" I asked. She looked up, surprised, then smiled faintly. "I think I've got it handled." Still, I crouched beside her, helping clear the fallen petals. For a while, we worked in silence, the soft rustle of leaves filling the space between us. Then she sighed, quiet, but heavy. "About the other night," I froze, waiting. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were kind. It's just," her voice trailed off before she steadied it again. "It's been a long time since I let anyone that close. Even for a moment." Her honesty caught me off guard. "You don't have to explain," I said softly. "I think I do," she murmured. "I lost someone once, my husband. Years ago. And after that, I decided I'd keep things simple. Clear. Rules help with that." Her fingers brushed a rose stem, careful to avoid the thorns. "But then you showed up. And suddenly the house didn't feel so quiet anymore. I didn't expect that. I didn't plan for it." There was something about the way she said plan, like love, or even warmth, was something she'd deliberately crossed off her to-do list long ago. I didn't try to comfort her. I just listened, really listened. The way her voice wavered, then steadied again. The way her shoulders lifted with every careful breath. When she finally looked up, the fading light caught her eyes, soft, glistening, vulnerable. "You're too young to get caught up in my mess," she said, almost as a whisper. "Maybe I'm just old enough to understand it," I replied. She let out a small, trembling laugh, not quite happy, not quite sad. Then she stood, brushing her hands clean, and said quietly, "You should probably head in. It's getting cold." But before she turned away, her hand hesitated, just for a heartbeat, near mine. Not touching. Not crossing the line. Just close enough to remind us both it was there. As she walked back toward the porch, the garden seemed to breathe with her, alive, fragile, and full of unspoken things. And I realized that sometimes, the hardest boundaries to respect are the ones someone builds to protect their own heart. The next weekend, Clara asked if I could help her repaint the upstairs hallway. It was an old house, the kind where every corner seemed to carry the ghost of a previous life, and she said a fresh coat of paint might make it feel lighter. I agreed, though part of me suspected she didn't really need the help. Maybe she just didn't want to spend another quiet afternoon alone. When I came downstairs that Saturday morning, she had already set everything up: plastic sheets, brushes, a small radio playing old songs that hummed softly beneath the sound of rain outside. She wore a faded blue shirt and jeans, her hair tied back messily. There was something almost vulnerable in how simple she looked, not the poised, distant landlady, but someone entirely human. "All right," she said, handing me a brush. "Walls first, then trim. Try not to make a mess." I smiled. No promises. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the kind that no longer felt fragile. Every so often, our brushes would scrape in rhythm, and the soft music would fill the spaces our words didn't need to. At one point, I caught her humming, the same tune I'd heard that first week from my room upstairs. It felt strange and comforting at once, like finding something familiar in a different season. When she stretched to reach the top corner near the ceiling, I stepped closer to steady the ladder. She didn't ask me to, it just felt natural. But as she leaned a little too far, her foot slipped, and instinct took over. My hands caught her waist before she could stumble. Time stilled. Her breath caught sharply. My palms felt the warmth of her through the thin cotton of her shirt. The paintbrush clattered softly to the floor. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, very slowly, she turned her head, her face inches from mine. I could see the faint paint smudge on her cheek, the tiny flecks of gray in her hair, the uncertain smile that tried to hide what her eyes couldn't. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, a whisper meant for that small space between us. "Rule number 4, she said. No physical contact between tenants and landlady." A heartbeat passed. Then she smiled, a faint, trembling smile that didn't quite know whether to stay or leave. "I guess I just broke it." She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. The air felt heavy, charged with everything we hadn't said. Then, just as gently, she stepped back, brushing her fingers against her cheek as if trying to erase the moment. "Accidents happen," she murmured, her tone lighter now, though her eyes gave her away. I picked up the brush, pretending to focus on the wall. But my heart was still beating too fast, and every sound in the room, the music, the rain, her breathing, seemed amplified. When the radio switched to a slower song, she glanced at me with a soft, almost embarrassed laugh. "You know," she said, "rules make people feel safe. But sometimes, safety feels overrated." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. But something invisible had shifted. The walls we were painting weren't the only ones changing color. Later, as I washed the brushes, she paused by the doorway, watching me. "Thank you," she said softly. "For today." I wanted to say for what part. But the words didn't come. Because we both knew. The next few days felt different. Not in any visible way. Clara still made her tea in the morning, still hummed in the garden, still smiled politely when our paths crossed, but something beneath all that quiet routine had shifted. We were both pretending nothing had changed, but everything had. Then one afternoon, a small white notice appeared taped to the front door. I saw it before she did, "For sale." My stomach tightened. The house, her house, was going to be sold. When she came home later, I waited until she noticed it herself. Her expression stayed calm, but her eyes faltered for just a second, a brief, almost imperceptible flicker of pain. "So it's true," I said softly. "You're leaving." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached up and peeled the paper from the door, folding it neatly before tucking it into her pocket. "It's just time," she said, almost to herself. "Sometimes you have to start over." I wanted to ask why now. Or is it because of me? But the words stuck in my throat. That evening, I found her in the kitchen, standing by the window as dusk settled across the backyard. The world outside was painted in silver and violet, the air smelled faintly of rain. She looked tired, not in her face, but in the way she stood, as if carrying something she couldn't quite put down. "Clara," I said quietly. "If I've done something to make you uncomfortable," she turned then, her eyes soft but steady. "No. You didn't make me uncomfortable, Daniel. You made me, remember." "Remember what?" "That I'm still here." Her voice trembled. "That I can still feel things I thought I buried years ago." She looked away, her hands tightening around the edge of the counter. "That scares me." I took a slow step closer, careful not to cross the invisible line she always kept between us. "Then why run from it?" "Because I know how these things end," she whispered. "I've already lost once. I don't want to lose again, even the little piece I've managed to build." The kitchen light flickered softly above us, throwing her shadow across the wall. She looked fragile in that moment, not weak, but human. "Clara," I said, my voice low, "you deserve more than peace. You deserve to feel alive." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room, that same silence that had followed us from the storm, from the garden, from every moment we'd almost said too much. Then, slowly, she turned to face me. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed my cheek. Her thumb traced just beneath my eye, soft as breath. "You didn't make me uncomfortable," she said again, barely a whisper now. "You made me remember I'm still alive." Her touch lingered, then fell away. She smiled, small, beautiful, heartbreaking. "But remembering isn't the same as being ready." Before I could answer, she stepped back, gently ending whatever might have begun. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, the space between us felt like the pause between goodbye and the words we couldn't say. When she finally turned to leave, I stayed standing there, still feeling the warmth of her hand on my skin long after she was gone. And for the first time, I understood that sometimes love doesn't fade because it's weak. It fades because one of you is too brave to let it stay. The house felt emptier once the decision was made. Boxes began to appear, stacked neatly by the hallway, labeled in her careful handwriting. Every day, something familiar disappeared, the photo on the mantel, the scent of lavender polish, the quiet hum of her favorite radio station. It was like watching a home slowly forget itself. I told myself I'd leave before the sale went through. That it would be easier if we both just moved on. But on the morning I packed my last bag, something in me refused to go without saying goodbye. She was in the garden, where I first really saw her, kneeling by the roses. The petals had begun to fall with the season, soft crimson scattered against the grass. She looked peaceful there, yet her movements were slower, more deliberate, as if each one carried the weight of parting. I stood by the gate for a moment before finally speaking. "You're really going through with it?" She turned, startled, then smiled softly. "I thought you'd already left." "I tried," I said. "Didn't make it far." That earned a small laugh, the kind that only escapes when the heart's too tired to hide anymore. She brushed her hands clean and walked over, stopping a few steps away. "You don't owe me a goodbye," she said gently. "I know," I replied. "But maybe I owe myself one." For a while, neither of us spoke. The late morning light wrapped around us, warm and forgiving. A breeze stirred through the roses, carrying that faint, familiar scent, the one I'd come to associate with her presence. Finally, she broke the silence. "You were good company, Daniel. More than you realize. It's been a long time since this house felt alive." Her voice caught slightly on that last word. I wanted to say something, to tell her that she was the one who made me feel alive. But sometimes words ruin what silence already understands. So instead, I stepped closer, just enough for her to hear my breath. "Maybe it wasn't the house," I said quietly. "Maybe it was us." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, all the boundaries we'd built seemed to dissolve. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitating before it found mine. Our fingers intertwined, naturally, like they'd been waiting for that moment all along. Her palm was warm, steady, and trembling all at once. "Rules are rules," she whispered, her lips curving into that familiar, tender smile. I smiled back. "Unless you break them with me." For a long moment, we just stood there, no need for declarations, no promises of forever. Just two people who had found something rare and quiet and real in the spaces between words. When she leaned her head against my shoulder, I felt her exhale, a small, content sigh that seemed to release every unspoken fear. The sunlight touched her hair, turning it gold. Neither of us said goodbye. We didn't have to. Because sometimes, the most beautiful endings aren't about leaving or staying, they're about finally letting your guard down, long enough to feel what you were always meant to feel. And as I held her there, in that quiet garden where it all began, I realized that some rules don't fade because we break them, they fade because love finally makes them unnecessary. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something quiet and real, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes love doesn't need to be loud to be lasting. More slow burn stories are coming, the kind that whisper, not shout. Stay with me, and let's keep telling them together. Dizzy.